Thank you all for coming. I'm Reid, one of the general partners here at CRV. Hopefully you're enjoying our wonderful office. It's hopefully a little bit different than stuff your other VC offices. We're very proud of it. The design was no thanks to us, though. It was an actual designer who ran a design studio, and we commandeered it from him like every good venture capitalist does. I am very, very excited to have Jeanne DeWitt here with me on stage, COO at our portfolio company, Vercel, a company I'm on the board of. Jeanne joined Vercel, I think it's 7 months ago.
8.
She's counting every single day and getting so much done. Jeanne has had a great go-to-market and operational experience career across Google, Stripe, and now the best of the best, Vercel. I can unequivocally say that she is the best executive I have ever worked with, and I truly mean that. I tell my partnership this after we came out of the first board meeting and have felt it as we've interacted since then. So, Jeanne, thank you so much for doing this. We'll be diving into some questions here on Vercel and go-to-market, and of course, go-to-market meets AI.
No.
So, with that,
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, let's start with the easy one. You joined as COO, which is a broad title, but what was the mandate when you came in, and what were you expected to do in the first 6-9 months, and what have you done?
Yeah, so I have more of a go-to-market shaped COO role. So basically I sort of say if it touches a customer or makes $1, it's in my remit. So that's marketing, sales, all of your technical sales functions, customer success, support, partnerships, et cetera, which I was really excited about and was important to me actually when G and I were discussing this role, because throughout my career, I've always felt like go-to-market orgs are this sort of Venn diagram of strategies. Like marketing's got a strategy, mostly overlaps with sales, but not entirely, which sort of mostly overlaps with support, but not entirely. And I've always wanted to be able to actually design something end-to-end to have this really integrated customer lifecycle. So that was sort of broadly the remit, is come in and kind of turn that actually from what was a somewhat siloed set of functions into a more integrated machine, and then turn that into an engine. So when I was interviewing, I think the company was more at about 150 million in ARR, maybe a little less even, and was starting to get early at bats in enterprise. So, felt like there was a there. How do we go from getting a couple of those to turning that into something more replicable? Was starting to get into multi-product. So originally started, more of this front-end hosting platform, was starting to get serious about CDN and security, super early on AI, which feels crazy to say at this point, but okay, how do we go build a multi-product machine? And then with such a large open source footprint across Next.js, also how do you capitalize on that and build a global business? So that's really exciting. I got to go through a lot of those chapters at Stripe of going single product to multi-product, startups to enterprise, et cetera. Everyone's excited to do it again and maybe avoid a couple of mistakes we made.
Love it. And you've been at now 3 companies, I guess, that have been largely product and engineering led, from the founders all the way through to the organization. What are some of the challenges in dealing with building a go-to-market engine at a kind of engineering led company?
I think I kind of have this really unique upbringing in that I started at Google in 2004. So the first product I worked on was Gmail. It had launched 2 months before I joined the company. And when I joined at Google, it was probably, I would argue, the most engineering-centric company maybe ever created up until that point. If you were an engineer, you started and immediately got some ginormous paycheck and equity package. If you were everything else, you started as a contractor and were fired every single Friday in batch. And if you were lucky to be there a couple of months later, you got to interview a second time after having, work product, and then maybe you got to stay. And, looking at that, I was like, as far as I can tell, we were the exact same. I just picked a different major, which one could argue a French major might have been a questionable decision, but anyway, here we are. So I think that we're just at Google at the time, if you weren't in engineering, you really were described, quote unquote, as a second-class citizen. And so I think one of the things I learned is how do you make yourself congruent with a very engineering-led culture? And so for me, that was a couple things. One was becoming incredibly deep in the product. I ended up getting credibility with the engineering organization because I got to a point where I knew the product better than the average engineer working on Gmail. And so if you were building something or if you just launched it and it broke, there was a decent chance I could explain that to you better than anybody else. So that was a big one that stuck with me. The second one was just being extremely data driven. So, I'd bring problems. I worked on Gmail support, which was my first job. And engineers would tell me that they did not exist. A good example of this was, Gmail was the first really massive JavaScript application. And in 2004, believe it or not, the top browser was Internet Explorer. Internet Explorer did actually not really play nice with JavaScript. And so Gmail would go to load and it would get stuck on this blank white page. And all the engineers would always tell me, that's not a thing. I was like, well, I know it's a thing. And so, bringing data to bear on that were sort of the two, I would say, tent poles of how to work with an engineering-led culture. And then I really started to just seek that out. For me, I always want to work at the most innovative company, and I think also where go-to-market arguably adds the most value is in highly engineering-centric companies, because you're a differentiated asset, right? There's a point at which if you build it, they won't come. It actually needs to be brought to market. And if you can build a go-to-market that works in an engineering-led culture, then you're pretty differentiated.
And what do you think has fundamentally changed in go-to-market over the last 15 years?
I had a point where, so growing up at Google, you had all these PhDs who were really inventing aspects of the internet and at the forefront of innovation. And I remember you left out one job I had, which is post-Google, I went to a startup that didn't end up being a great fit for me. And so when I left that,
not an engineering first.
It was actually not an engineering first.
That's why I left it out. Didn't fit the narrative.
There we go. But I really reflected on what had kept me at Google. What was I going to look for in the next phase? And this was 2015, which was the peak of programming. And I really felt that I could see software commoditizing. So when I had worked at Google, Gmail launched with 1 gigabyte of storage. That was just mind-blowing to the world. And it took Yahoo over a year to replicate that. So a full year of technical differentiation. And then in 2015, when I was looking at jobs, it was all right, who can make the next best Slack emoji, right? And so I became convinced at that point that if technical differentiation is going to become increasingly marginal, then that's sort of like other products like cereal. And so often you buy cereal because of how you've been made to feel about that brand. And so that actually makes go-to-market more important, because go-to-market is helping you feel something about the technology you're using. And I became very convinced that how it felt to be sold to by a company would actually play a role in whether or not you picked something. And so we spent a lot of time when I was at Stripe really trying to build an experiential go-to-market. An example of this was when we would do discovery, a typical sales org would ask you 1,000 questions. We actually developed a highly choreographed whiteboarding session. And it felt very organic if you were on the receiving end of it, but it was not. It was actually systematically going through those same 20 discovery questions, but drawing a picture for you, annotating that, and then giving you an asset at the end of that. And so that's now what I'm trying to do again at Vercel, and then bring some AI to bear along the way.
Well, on that note, Vercel is the AI cloud, obviously shipping AI products like V0 and AI SDK, and no, this isn't a Vercel commercial. But what has changed on the go-to-market side, and how have you been using AI to kind of reshape your playbook and how you operate with your team?
Yeah, in go-to-market, what you're trying to do as a leader actually is to get a large and increasingly larger number of people to do the exact same thing as well as your best person, which is actually extremely hard to do, right? You have Salesforce and you have processes and they're stage gated, and you have content hoping that everybody will run the pitch deck the same way, offer up the same next steps, et cetera. And with AI, I think there are now parts of that process that you can achieve that. So what we've been doing, go-to-market engineering is the new hotness. When I joined Vercel, I was like, I'm in charge. I get to pivot roles. And so the first thing I did in my first 6 weeks was took 3 sales engineers. Vercel hires, very technical sales engineers. And so I was like, congratulations, you are now my founding members of my go-to-market engineering team. And we're going to go bring AI to bear on everything we do in GTM. And so the first thing we did was, okay, what is one of the more replicable things you do in sales? For us, that's inbound sales development. So folks who contact sales, those all need to be qualified, but it's pretty darn straightforward. You've got a qualification framework you're looking for, you've got a set of questions, et cetera. And so we went and started by having one of the go-to-market engineers shadow our top performing SDR. And you can go see that person. They've got 7 different tabs open. They're doing LinkedIn research here, company research here, looking at 5 different disparate, sources of data that Vercel has on it, and then ultimately coming up with either something to say on the phone or an email. And so we were able to take that one go-to-market engineer. He worked on it about a third of his time in concert with this top SDR. And after 6 weeks, we would sort of feed what the agent wanted to do into Slack. Human in the loop would decide whether or not it agreed with the agent. And within 6 weeks, we had the confidence to say, we're actually not going to have humans to do this anymore. So we had 10 inbound SDRs, and we now have 1 agent manager. We actually still keep the human in the loop. So she is largely still QAing and signing off on what did that agent want to do. But that we have the same lead to opportunity conversion rate. We have fewer touches required to convert it to an opportunity, so it's more efficient. And we get instant data on the degree to which the content of inbound sales is changing. So we can actually figure out when conversion rates are dropping, did we get worse quality or not? And then 90% fewer humans working on that. And those 9 folks, it's not like everybody graduated from college and was like, I want to be an inbound SDR that's fully utilizing my capacity. So instead, they get to just skip that 18 months of their life and move into outbound prospecting and move up the value chain.
And do you think that this is representative of all SDRs, BDRs, CSMs, or do you think that the Vercel, given the resources and how much data you have, that this is kind of a bit of a unique?
I think it's a combo. So I think there's certain functions that lend themselves better to AI right now, which is basically if it is the more deterministic something is, and then we sort of say the more you can make a process legible, by which it means you actually have a strong point of view on what is a best in class approach. That at this stage lends itself well to an agent. And I think obviously you've got AI SDR software out there. I think one of the reasons we were able to do this that quickly is quite good data. We don't have a large data science team, but we really did invest in data science. And so we have a lot of enrichment data that we've taken time to get structured in Snowflake and augment with our own first party data. So that investment paid off. And then 2, I do think given where AI is right now, that actually the context and the prompt matters most, which is why I'm somewhat skeptical of certain classes of software right now for functions, because I think the level of context and tweaking you want from your environment suggests you might be better off doing it yourself. Doing this, again, like I said, it was about a third of a person for 6 weeks. Unfortunately for me as a revenue leader, it costs Vercel $1,000 a year to run this agent. So, which is sort of a bummer because I would like to sell a lot of it and I wouldn't make very much money. So we open sourced it instead. So if anybody wants to see how we built it, actually you can just go find it, and we've got a GitHub repro for it and all the steps. But I do think that's a reality right now, is we have an initiative called Agent on Every Desk, which is sort of a throwback to PC on every desktop. At one point, the world thought it would be crazy that every human would have a computer in front of them. Now every human has 5 of them. We sort of think it's the same thing. Right now, most companies have 3 agents. At some point, you're going to have 5 agents to humans, right? And so I think there's some value right now in learning how to build some of those yourself.
I'm one of these very obnoxious LinkedIn posters, once a week, twice a week, just something out there. But by far my most engaged post was around, I was hating on AI SDRs and how it's just the worst experience. Everyone across my portfolio had bought one of these third-party ones, and it just was a terrible experience. through and through. But I think it just comes back to not having the internal data, the historical data to actually, you kind of need to build it yourself in some ways.
I did the same thing.
So just blasting.
I totally hated
Oh my gosh.
SDR at a similar event, and fortunately there was an AI SDR founder in the audience who definitely wanted to talk to me after I got off the stage. But that's, there are other things one can throw AI at.
Yes, yes. So you were at Stripe from tens of millions, hundreds of millions to billions in revenue, right?
Yep.
Vercel, you joined in the hundreds, soon hopefully, knock on wood, to billions in revenue. What are some non-obvious go-to-market tactics either at Stripe or that you're seeing at Vercel that isn't just qualify the inbound lead, go to the event, knock on that door?
This isn't exactly how you frame that question, and it should be obvious, but I find companies don't do this very well. Actually, like a segmentation model that's specific to your company, I think is pretty key. It was interesting because we did this at Stripe and then had a revenue leader that undid it and, in my view, fucked it up for a couple of years, and then we went back. So I think it matters. We're doing that at Vercel now. So when at Stripe, we benefited, great product market fit, like tons of inbound demand. And then we reached a point, like most companies that have a strong PLG motion, where the growth aspirations were in excess of what PLG only funnel was going to drive. And so as we sought to go outbound, we needed to have a really strong point of view on where are we winning and where could you do more of that replicably if you started to go outbound. And so at Stripe developed like a pretty focused segmentation model where we sort of figured out the main driver of how you think about purchasing Stripe and the set of products you end up using and valuing is a function of your business model. Sort of makes sense. It's a payments company, but like that wasn't totally obvious out of the gates. And so we put together a segmentation model that was like, you're a B2B direct company, you're a B2C direct company, or you're a B2B2C, e.g. a marketplace like Instacart, or a B2B2B, e.g. a platform like Shopify. And that was the go-to-market for a while, and it just drove a lot of focus and basically end-to-end plays for those. And so similar thing, we're looking at Vercel right now. So like you're an e-com company, pretty darn different for us than selling to a crypto company. E-com, actually, like you've got a chief digital officer, you're not overly, technical. The competitor is Shopify versus crypto, it's competing against home-rolled, AWS, hyper technical, et cetera. So I actually think, just basics are still undervalued in most go-to-market orgs. So that's one. I think maybe the other, just with AI that we're doing a lot more of, is just the ability to do more customization at scale. So good examples of this would be like we're using V0 so that if I'm selling to you, I can create a microsite that's for browser base, and it's just going to be our, shared home. We'll have content that's only relevant to you, we can collaborate on that. So I think you have more of an opportunity to do that type of work at scale today.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting V0, I think of it as actually more of a technical product, moving more consumer, but internal reps at companies love it to demo whatever it is they need to.
Yep.
And product managers love it, design as well. Shifting gears over to the talent side, obviously, we're here in San Francisco, it's an absolute talent war, day in, day out. The company's growing quickly, you're scaling the team. How do you balance that with also keeping the bar really, really high? In that tension. Yeah. Do you ever lower the bar? Is it, do you keep it the same even if, hiring plans move out? Just walk me through it.
Yeah, it's tough. Like, I feel like I've seen this movie before. It's like 2022 all over again. It's supposed to take a little bit longer in between cycles.
Yes.
But anyway, so, okay, a couple of answers to this. I mean, first of all, so Vercel's pretty remote, and we've decided that we want to have a little bit more density. So we're shifting to a bit more SF New York to kind of get a critical mass of folks in office. So we're doing the same on the go-to-market side. And actually last week we added a third location. I'm not going to tell you guys what it is because you can't go. So it's another major city. But anyway, we did it because I was like, there's just no way that we're going to meet our hiring goals in SF or New York alone. So the things that I think we're doing potentially somewhat differently than others is, one, the process matters. I learned that at Stripe, and the frequency with which candidates compliment the Vercel process is like almost 100%. So that's thing one. Thing two is the velocity of that process. So if I can at least get folks to the end of it before they can go get 3 other competitive offers, now I have a shot at either locking somebody in before they finish, or at least having, sort of be on the front foot. So that's another aspect of it. And then I think we do a mix of everybody wants sort of a blue chip profile, folks who are slightly more ahead of where you are today and have the sort of experience and skills you're looking for. And then how do you find diamonds in the rough? For us, you have, particularly on the technical side, all sorts of folks who have used Next.js throughout their careers, who are just extremely missionary about the value of the product. And so I think everyone can do the obvious, let's go hire from Stripe or poach from Vercel. Or you can also figure out where might you have a niche that really gravitates towards the particular product that you offer.
Makes sense. Maybe last question before I do have some rapid fire questions to close this out. And all these questions are thanks to Veronica.
Yeah.
I didn't write a single one of these, so thank you, Veronica. So moving up market, it's very, a lot of kind of PLG companies, a lot of developer-led companies kind of feed off the inbound, and then ultimately you end up raising some venture capital. You get to a scale, growth rate starts to come down, not that there isn't still interest, but inevitably you have to move up market. Yeah. And oftentimes the board and the founders are a bit at odds. The board says, where are the $1 million deals? The founders say, hey, the product works great, everything's great, let's just build more product for people. And I'm just curious, what are some learnings going from Stripe that I'm sure probably has tens of millions, if not $50, $100 million plus deals, and then here at Vercel as moving up market and getting larger ACVs is an important piece of the business.
Have you ever asked me about
Never. Not once.
Figure deals?
Not once.
No.
Not,
First
not
board
twice.
meeting.
Not
yeah,
once.
exactly. Yeah. So lots of thoughts on this topic. So my sort of first sales role was in Google Workplace back 2010 to 2014. And Google landed pretty early Genentech and Jaguar Land Rover. And it was like an enterprise business we have. And, went out and started scaling a massive enterprise sales organization and wasted multiple years of time basically pursuing the enterprise market, which just didn't actually exist, nor did we have product market fit at that point. And so I was so struck by that, it ended up having to retrench, et cetera, that when I left, was like, okay, we'll never let that happen again. So at Stripe, when we first, I think you always want some amount of pull. So for Stripe, it was 2 forms. Form 1 was with a lot of consumption-based business models, this is true, which is your customers start to grow up. So for Stripe, Lyft and Shopify were the 2 that were growing up. And they were starting to become real churn threats. Actually, Lyft, which was the canonical Stripe customer, we plastered that company all over everything because we built instant payouts for them. They, out of the blue, RFP'd us and churned half their business, right? And this was the customer. So that's sort of one sign as folks are bumping up against the top of your product. And then we had Amazon use us in Singapore. So Prime launched in Singapore. And so you're okay, it's not their main market, but that's legit a product Bezos knows about. So, that if we do well there would suggest that we might be able to be enterprise ready. So those are sort of the early signs I look for. And then the 2 things I think we got initially right at Stripe were, 1, the decision to move up market is a company decision. So it is not a go-to-market one. Everybody has to lock arms. And one of the things I did was we created a lighthouse list, which was 30 customers that we felt would not only tell the market Stripe has arrived in enterprise, but also would be the types of customers that you would want as design partners. They would help you build the product that you wanted to in enterprise. And so I literally went to Patrick and was like, do you want these 30? Because if I go get them, we're gonna have to build stuff. And so if you are not interested in Expedia, if you're not interested in Uber, let's just take them off the list now. So we agreed that. We established a lighthouse engineering team. So we had a senior EM and a couple engineers that then rode along with us on all customer meetings, because this was every bit R&D as it was a revenue endeavor. We also did like deal reviews across the entirety of the sales cycle, so that basically every checkpoint you could be like, you sure you still want this? Because I really wanted to avoid the like Salesforce me, like they got a $5 million deal on the line and we had to build the thing that no one wanted to build. So it was always like this opt-out thing of like, we're doing this or we're not. And then the last thing over here in picking that lighthouse list was we got really, really crisp about what Stripe's ICP was at that point. And then we looked for the next most adjacent enterprise that looked like that. So for us at that time, we were crushing it in marketplaces, DoorDash, Instacart, Lyft, all on us. So we went and looked at Airbnb, Uber, Expedia, like what were all the ones that we had missed. So it's been interesting Well, let me take a step back. So that worked really, really well. The mistake Stripe made that I think most companies make is declaring yourself enterprise ready prematurely. So we landed a bunch of these over the course of 18 months and it was like, all right, we're enterprise ready. But really we weren't. We were like ready with forward-leaning enterprises, whether that was the company was a digital native or the human inside the traditional enterprise was forward-leaning. And so we sort of, we disbanded the lighthouse engineering team, all that type of stuff. And you'd think like, Stripe now trillions of dollars of payments, tons, like the majority of its revenue is from public companies. But it was 2 years ago we had a goal of having, I think it was landing $100 million deals in a year. It's not that many for a company of that size and scale. That was 2 years ago. And we started the enterprise journey in 2017. That's how long that took. So coming to Vercel, we've sort of had the same dynamic of we won a couple large 7-figure deals, and then you sort of were like, all right, enterprise market fit, let's go get 20 of these things. But if you unpack all of them, you're like, okay, we did win a bank, but the guy at the bank is like super innovative and like will run through walls. And like, that company was like basically going out of business and willing to risk it all. And, like you can go through each of them and be like, yeah, this is probably like not straight down the fairway.
This is why I'm so excited about security products, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
It helps that case quite a bit. All right, rapid fire questions to close this out. What's your favorite AI product besides Vercel right now?
Oh God, I don't even know. This is an unanswer, but I will say I was like a Gong hater for a very, very long time. And now Gong is like my favorite facilitator of AI. The stuff that we have extracted out of Gong using AI is like mind-boggling.
And all we've heard about the business is that it flatlined and now it's completely back. So
yeah.
You're on trend. What did you automate this year that returned the most team hours?
I mean, the lead agent is a great example. The other one is just, we also home built our support agent. That now handles 75% of cases, which I think is like well above any real benchmark out there, and has enabled the support organization to basically keep headcount flat year on year despite a meaningfully larger customer base.
Amazing. And one metric you'd ban from board decks? Is it one that I asked you about?
No. Oh man. I don't know if I have one. We just came up with Vercel. It's almost the inverse of like, what I want is like a static set of metrics that we all agree are the right ones. So Vercel actually just came up with, we've got Vercel managed requests, Vercel managed compute, Vercel managed tokens, which are sort of like the three things that if those are up into the right revenue should be as well. So I'm just more like, can we figure out what the drivers of the business are and consistently report on them?
I've been asking for usage metrics for 10 years and it's just different every board deck. There are usage metrics, they just move around a lot.
Yeah.
Favorite go-to-market tactic that you feel is underutilized?
I outbound by executives. That's another thing we do, which is like our SDR team. This was also a fun use of AI. So we've created
emails.
Yeah, we've created a Jeanne agent. So like basically, the SDRs would write outbound emails for me. We're trying to teach the org to go do executive selling rather than selling to developers and engineers because developers don't do 7-figure deals and Reid wants more of them. So so anyway, they started by writing these emails and they were horrendous. And so, I'd go and I'd edit them and I'd put them back in Slack and be like, nice try, here's what you should have actually said. And then what we started to do was when I would send it, we'd BCC an email alias, and then we feed them all into a Google group that we can now go train an agent on. So at some point we'll flip to like SDRs won't write them, I won't edit them, the Jeanne agent will just do it. But right now it's also a cultural thing of like, in the trenches, like I'm gonna go alongside you as we all learn how to sell to executives. But that's been a fun one.
Cool. We'll open it up for 3 questions from the audience for Jeanne very quickly here before we get back to libations. Anyone?
Does Vercel have a customer success org?
It does. It's meaningfully smaller than when I arrived. Vercel is a very technical product. And so when I looked at customer success, to me, it felt like more of a router than like a one-shot answer. And particularly like with developers, technical product, like people want an instantaneous answer. So we pulled back customer success and are doing more technical post-sales.
I was going to say, what did you pull out of Gong that surprised you the most?
Oh, this was so good. Okay, so end of Q2, we lose a couple 6-figure deals, and I'm like, I would really like to better understand that. And so we ran Gong on all of the, we call it the Lost Bot. We built an agent that we dumped all the Gong transcripts into emails, Slack messages, and we fed it a prompt, and it basically would output, here's why you really lost this deal. And it's just epic. So like the largest deal we had lost on price was the reason in Salesforce. And this also like the word choice of this Lost Bot was just like brutal. But so like it basically was like, you actually lost this deal because you never talked to an economic buyer. You attempted to present like a TCO analysis, but the person on the other end of it didn't actually believe it. And so it was effectively like, no, you didn't lose on price, you lost on your ability to communicate value, which, for me was great because like I would argue we have an opportunity to get better at quantitative selling. And like that's on me as a leader of like, how do I go and train people how to do a TCO, make it easier to do, that type of stuff. So we now run it on everything, and then we've like shifted it forward. So now Vercel is like very Slack oriented. So we create a Slack channel for every single customer internally and often externally. And so now it'll feed things into the Slack channel to be like, you seem to be messing up the deal in the following way, you haven't done this thing. So it's sort of a coach that you cannot get away from.
I was going to say, it's like a referee, blaming the loss on a referee versus you just didn't score enough points.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how you lose the game, actually.
There you go.
Final question.
I've inspired a couple more questions.
Yeah. I'll let you pick.
All right, you had your hand up first in the back. Yeah.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Jude. Thank you both. I'm curious to hear what the feedback from go-to-market to product looks like at Vercel. And so, go-to-market is like on the field, seeing everything. How do you influence the direction of the actual product, and what does the information transfer look like?
Yeah, this is probably our like most not least well-running process right now. It's actually, I had my one-on-one with Guillermo this morning, and he was like, this is the number one thing I need you paying more attention to. So there's a bunch of things we've been working on. So first of all, go to market, when we would feed feedback into EPD, it was like very ad hoc. We built a GTM feedback app that now it's a better way of doing what people have often done in Salesforce, where you can have like a lost opportunity associated with stuff. We've just turned it into an app that's like far more usable. So that now stack ranks everything, associates it with the deal size. And actually what I'm really excited about is it's going to let us like do a closed loop cycle where once that thing launches, we now know exactly which AEs said that was a blocker or upside on a deal. And then I can go back and months after the thing launches, be like, you said you needed this. Why have they not bought it? So one, we're trying to get like much more quantitative and holistic about it. So that's one on just like systematic feedback loop. The second thing is just how we get the EPD org more involved in our sales processes and blockers. So we're working on that now. Like I mentioned at Stripe, we had a really good ride along program. And then we ultimately developed like a priority customer ask process where you could prioritize things and make calls. So we'll see what version of that works at Vercel. And then I just blanked on the third thing I was going to say. The other thing we struggle with is Vercel has incredible product velocity, but that often means go-to-market can basically find out we ship something via Twitter. So we're working on some alignment around, what are tiers? How do we get better alignment and roadmap visibility? So that's sort of the third thing we're working on. So haven't solved it at Vercel yet, but there are a bunch of things that we did well at Stripe that hopefully will translate.
Cool.
Yeah.
Jeanne, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.